My name is Dale Witherington. My wife Sue is back here. And she's really the strength of our ministry. I get to do a lot of the fun stuff, but she's the one who makes this thing work. And someday I'd recommend have her back and give her 15-minute talks on identity in Christ. And you'll never have me back, but you'll have her back. Well, thanks to Bill Gertz and Gary Lance is in here someplace, and some of the others from the Community Action Team out in Sandy who talked with Pastor Tom and said we'd like to see if Dale can come share. So thank you guys for doing that. It's a privilege to be here. I never take it lightly, and I don't take it for granted when I stand behind another man's pulpit. You have a church with a pastor who has a call to be your shepherd, right, your guide, your instructor. He's also called to be your watchman. Amen. Part of being a watchman in your prophetic prayer this morning is to make sure you don't get some deceiver, false prophet behind the pulpit. Yeah. Amen. So I don't take this lightly. I've been asked to speak to you this morning about biblical citizenship. The concept of biblical citizenship comes from Philippians 1:27. And I'm going to quote 1:27 to you. I'm going to give you the three ways it can be interpreted. But instead of preaching at you this morning, is it okay if I just kind of tell you the story? Yeah. All right. I think sometimes we in the church would rather experience what the Lord is doing and not just have someone throwing stuff at us. Yeah. Okay? Philippians 1:27 says, "Only live your life in a manner worthy of the gospel of Jesus Christ." Only live your life in a manner worthy of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now the Apostle Paul speaks with that language in other places as well. I think of Ephesians 4:1 where he says, "Live your life worthy of the calling." He speaks in Corinthians about living a worthy life. But he uses different language in the New Testament Greek. And as you would all know, the New Testament was not written in the original English. It was written in original Greek. And that's important to me, being a man who's half Greek and half Jewish. So I'm kind of split right down the middle here because I'm really about 50-50. But the Greek in the Philippians version is a little bit different than the way Paul uses it elsewhere. In the Philippians version in 1:27, and he says, "Only live your life in a manner worthy of the gospel of Jesus Christ," it can also mean only behave as citizens worthy of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And if you do a deeper dive into the Greek, I'm going to get you on this one. Ready? It says, "Only do politics worthy of the gospel of Jesus Christ." Can you imagine what America would look like if our politicians did politics worthy of the gospel of Jesus Christ? They're not. Just thought I'd let you in. It's the role of the church to help raise up the righteous men and women who can then be called by God into government to then do politics worthy of the gospel. Yeah. That make sense? Yeah. That's Proverbs 29:2. When the righteous rule, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. Yeah. That's a pretty good barometer of, I'm just thinking through your last 2.5, 3 years. I've worked with our legislators now for the last decade. I became a pastor to our legislators back in 2012. And I don't know if the seed got planted well before that, so here's where the original seed maybe was planted. It was about, Sue, it's been 40 years. It's about 40 years ago this month. I was standing, I was serving in a church down in the cities. I was a junior high youth pastor, and I was the church's first athletic director. I came here from California. My goal in life, I grew up in Southern California, my goal in life is to play baseball for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Me and 500,000 of my closest friends. So I spent a lot of my time at Dodger Stadium and Angel Stadium. I played baseball and football in high school and college. And so because of an athletic background and the call to ministry. I got to be the first athletic director of Grace Church Edina before they became Grace Church Eden Prairie. But I was also the junior high youth pastor. So I worked with about 100 junior high kids, which means that every now and again I'm doing one of these in my restaurant. How many of you are in junior high? Yeah, it's your fault. No, we loved it. We had tremendous ministry with junior high kids, high school youth, college, but the focus at that time was junior high and creating an athletic ministry. I'm telling you that only because it seems so weird when my senior pastor walked up and he handed me a letter and he said, I can't go to this, but maybe you can. It's probably something you'd be interested in. I don't know why he said that until I read the letter and 2 words jumped out, and then I knew why he said that. The 2 words that jumped out in that letter were free lunch. I'm a junior high youth pastor. Junior high, free lunch, I'm in. What it turned out to be was Pastor Morris Wagner. At that time, Morris was the senior pastor at North Heights Lutheran Church down in the Twin Cities, and he was the national leader of the Lutheran Charismatic Revival, which in those days, folks, Lutheran and Charismatic did not go together. That was an oxymoron. That was like, it just didn't mix. And a number of you are doing this. You know what I'm talking about. Okay? Now, for just a little bit of religious background here. I was baptized as an infant Greek Orthodox. I told you I'm half Greek and half Jewish. I didn't know I was Jewish until I was 23 years old. That's when I met my biological dad, who was an Orthodox Jew, but a year before I met him, he'd come to Christ. That's a story I don't have time to tell today. But I was baptized in the Orthodox Church as an infant, heard the gospel for the first time in a little Lutheran church in El Segundo, California, met Jesus at a Billy Graham crusade because of a bunch of Baptist friends, married a Presbyterian, go to a charismatic church now in the cities, and I'm so non-denominational, I'm in danger of making a denomination out of non-denominationalism. So those of you who've done this Lutheran care, you get what I'm talking about. But here's what Morris wanted to say. There were 92 pastors showed up for a free lunch. Just saying. I have no idea how many he invited. But here's what he said. He said, God ordained 3 institutions. Yeah. The first institution God ordained is the family. Yeah. Everything revolves around the family. The second institution, and he put it in modern terminology, he said the second institution God created was the church. And the purpose of the church was to bring biblical morality into the families. Okay. He said the third institution that God created was government. That's right. And the purpose of government is to bring morality into a society of families. Amen. The question is, from where does government get its morality? Well, in this country, in every country, but in this country in particular, based on our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, the morality in our government that's supposed to come through legislation is supposed to come from Scripture. It's supposed to come from the influence of the church. And this was Morris's sermon for about a half an hour, and he said, if any of you want to talk about this a little more, stick around. And the whole place dispersed, and maybe 15 to 20 of us stuck around and want to find out, Pastor, what else could we be doing? Out of that, today in Minnesota, you have a group called the Minnesota Family Council, Minnesota Family Institute. How many of you are familiar with MFC? Okay, only a few hands, and it's all the old people. Okay, except one young lady over here. All right. Yes, I have one young lady in the back. Yes. I'm calling you young. U.S. Look, Minnesota Family Council has been one of the premier policy councils in the country, representing biblical morality, particularly in the area of pro-life, pro-biblical marriage, traditional marriage, and religious freedom, particularly religious freedom as it supports pro-life and pro-biblical marriage. Amen. That group exists today from that little group of 15 that we started back in November of 1982. Okay? Maybe that's where some of this seed of stuff came, because I had no interest, I had no knowledge of being involved as a pastor in the political world whatsoever. And back in 2012, I was sitting in my home office, and I was surfing the net, and came across a ministry that specializes in putting chaplains into state capitals around the country. I thought, that sounds pretty fascinating. And so I just started reading about it a little bit, and then I found out Minnesota's position had been open for 2 years. They couldn't find anybody. So I hand wrote a letter. I didn't do an email. I did a snail mail. Hand wrote a letter, put it in an envelope, stamped it, and said, hey, I don't know if you're really, I'm curious who you guys are, what you do. This sounds kind of intriguing to me. So what I'm telling you is, I did not feel any particular call from God, folks. I just thought, this sounds interesting. So I sent this letter in, forgot all about it, went about my life for 6 months before they called me. When they called me, the guy, he was so apologetic. He said, I need to tell you what happened. Your letter arrived right at the time where we were physically moving our offices. Their offices are based in Raleigh, North Carolina. So we were physically moving our offices. Our administrative leader, she took your letter, put it in one of the many boxes, sealed up the box. We moved. She and her husband did not move with us. They moved to another state. We just got to the box with your letter in it. Are you still interested in talking? They said, you still need somebody. Apparently you are. Long story short, we spent some time. I was part of a big men's retreat event down in Mobile, Alabama. And when everybody went from Mobile to Atlanta and flew home, I flew up to North Carolina and met with them. And I had a senator in North Carolina encourage me. He said, Dale, I hope you take the job. He said, because I want you to understand something. God bless you. I want you to understand something. These chaplains here with this organization, I tell them things I would never tell my pastor or my wife. I trust them that much. Now, it wasn't because he distrusted his pastor, and it certainly was not because he distrusted his wife. He was protecting both of them from media microphones being shoved in their faces. That makes sense? Because the media microphone will show up at the most inopportune times. Right. And the last thing he wanted was his pastor or his wife to be caught off guard with a media microphone. He also said this. He said, Dale, most people can understand the chaos involved in a political campaign. And that's pretty timely, because right now I know a number of you are helping different campaigns around the state here, around this area. I know a number of you are out there for Alan Duff, some of you for Todd Moose, and others, whoever. I'm just thinking of a couple of county commissioners and guys I'm running that I know them both. So the fact that you're doing that, thank you. Thank you for doing that. Okay? Some of you are knocking on doors, some of you are making phone calls, whatever. But he said people will understand the chaos of a campaign, especially if you're doing the door knocking, if you're doing the calling, if you're doing the hangers on the doors and so forth. He said, but what people don't really understand, the chaos begins right after you get elected. And he said, that's when we wonder where all the Christians were that were praying for us during the campaign. That's when we start wondering, where are they now? Because it's rare that we hear from them after we're elected, unless we're upset. Please consider taking the position. So I came back, I told my wife, I said, I think we're going to do this. And I went and made a couple contacts with a couple sitting senators, and I pretty well confirmed it. And that was about this time of year, October, November of 2012. So my first legislative session as a chaplain and a non-government employee, a voluntary missionary, instead of being a missionary to our state capital, instead of being a missionary sent overseas someplace. Yeah. Okay, same kind of a job. That session in 2013, I just used it as a time to get educated. They didn't invite me in. The last thing they needed was some pastor coming in and saying, hey, I got a Bible study for you. Many of them were involved in Bible studies already. They didn't need somebody they didn't know, they didn't invite in and say, come to my Bible study. That make sense? I spent that legislative session just starting to develop relationships with our legislators, with their staff. And it got to be kind of fun because I'd go down there during session 3-4 days a week, walk the halls. Every now and again there'd be a senator or there'd be a representative that would say, hey, pastor, can you come in here a second? And we'd sit, we'd chat a little bit, and on one particular occasion I can think of very clear, it's not the only one, it's one that's most clear, is when this particular representative, after just kind of chewing the fat a little bit, he got up and he closed his door, and he said, I got a real problem. And he just poured out his heart. These are the kind of opportunities, these are real people with real marriages. Some of them really hurting because of the stress of being in that kind of a job. These are people who start losing income from employment while they're serving as legislators. These are people who lose their businesses while they're serving as legislators. They don't all become millionaires by becoming legislators. You got to go to D.C. to become a millionaire. That's a whole different story. These are real people with real life, real hurting issues, real stuff. And they deal with real tough legislative issues. Every session, from about January to May or February to May, they have to deal with anywhere from 4,000 to 7,000 different pieces of law and determine which ones that might go forward. And it can be a brutally ugly process. How many of you heard the term dirty politics? Yeah, it's real. It's dirtier than you think. And I know you're already thinking it's pretty dirty. It can be really ugly. The Capitol grounds, the Capitol campus, it can be a very dark place. Because the enemy is attacking. Why would the enemy attack them? Because he doesn't want righteous legislation. Right. He doesn't want the righteous. And he's got a grip. So we're fighting not just this legislative battle, we're fighting deep spiritual battles that are manifested in legislation. Let me tell you about 3 of them that happened in 2013. This is when, now remember, I'm supposed to be there, I didn't say this, you can't remember, so I'm supposed to be there as a non-political, non-partisan chaplain, serving both sides of the aisle. Just to be there as a pastor and to stay out of politics. And that lasted about 27 seconds for me. Particularly in that session, because that session was the year that our legislature passed same-sex marriage. That year they passed the largest tax increase in the history of the state of Minnesota. And that year they tried to unionize in-home private child care. Now, I don't pay attention to a lot of legislative bills, but those 3 got my antenna because all 3 of those to me were not political. All 3 of those to me were biblical moral issues. Okay? And I'm wondering, where's the church? And the reason I'm wondering where the church is because particularly with the same-sex marriage battle, I'd have Christian legislators, but especially their staff, stop me in the hallway in tears, saying, Pastor Dale, where's the church? Same-sex marriage is going to pass here if we don't express what the Bible has to say about marriage. If we don't express what the Bible has to say, husband and a wife, if we don't say this, what's going to happen is our legislators are going to pass this law, and because the church who doesn't believe in Jesus but believes in same-sex marriage is going to see to it that they make enough noise, they're going to get it passed, and our legislators will say the faith community is in support of it, and that's exactly what happened. Okay? Now, you may disagree with me on my position in same-sex marriage. We can sit over coffee, and I'd be glad to walk through this with you. We just won't have time to do that today. It's not meant to be an argument, not meant to be a debate, not meant to put anybody down. It's meant to be, what is biblical truth?
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
See, here's, in my opinion, in Dale's opinion, One of the biggest problems we have in the country today, even in the church, is that we think this book is supposed to conform itself to us. Instead of us understanding we're supposed to conform to it. This is the Word of God, folks. And while we might not get everything perfect on this side of heaven, there's a lot that we can get right. Okay? And so our job is to study this as best as we can and go out and apply it. Application has always been really important to me. So, here it is now, May 20th, 2013. It's the last night of session. I said to my wife, I said, let's go down and see how they close this thing out. It's my first session. It's the end of what's known as a biennium, because in Minnesota, everything goes on 2-year cycles. So it's a biennium, and this was the end of a biennium. So we decided we would go down there. The gavel has to fall according to our state constitution. The gavel has to close things out at 11:59 because midnight is the next day. So it's got to be 11:59 on the last day. And my wife, how many of you been in the Capitol building? Okay, how many of you been up in the Senate chambers? Anybody been in the Senate chambers? Okay, and been in the gallery to look over the Senate? Okay, a few of you have. It's pretty beautiful, isn't it? It's a beautiful room, quite ornate. And at 11:55 at night, on a Monday night, the public is not around. The only public in the room were my wife and me. We were in the gallery, and then the sergeant at arms, because he had to make sure we weren't terrorists. Now, she might be. There's this brass railing at the top of the balcony that can look out over the Senate. And during the day when everybody's there, you can't stand at the railing. And I hate it when somebody tells me I can't do something, because then I go do it till they'll tell me to go sit down. That's just Dale. It's probably not scriptural, but it's still. But because nobody else was there, I was standing at the railing. Sue was off to my left about 6 or 8 feet. She's off praying in the Spirit. And when my wife is praying in the Spirit, don't even try to dissuade her from whatever's going on. So she's praying in the Spirit, and I'm standing at the railing. And as I'm praying, I pray with my eyes open because I want to see the senators I'm praying for. So I see Gazelka and Bach and Tomasoni and Rude and Hall and any number of others, Limmer and so forth. I'm seeing them, and then something happened to me that's not supposed to happen to somebody who went to a Baptist seminary. Okay? Just got to give this disclaimer. This doesn't happen to a guy with my theological background. But as I'm standing there, out of the corner of my eye, and for those of you who've been in the Senate chambers, you'll get them in your mind's eye. The far corner, kitty corner to me, that's about 200 feet away. And something was floating in the air, about 20 feet off the ground. And there's not supposed to be anything. What's floating in the chambers, 20 feet off the ground? There's no birds in there, there's no moths, there's no butterflies. And so I turned and looked to see what I was getting out of the corner of my eye. And descending out of heaven was a big bowl of garlic. Just like a big bowl of garlic that you go to the grocery store and purchase out of the produce section. And I will tell you that freaked me out. I can't find chapter and verse about floating garlic. I can find floating axe heads, but I can't find floating garlic descending from heaven. So I did what any courageous pastor would do in that circumstance. I closed my eyes. Because I was completely freaked out. I could still see it. And it came from across the room. And with my eyes closed, I physically saw it and felt it as it went into my sternum, into my heart, slide down into the pit of my stomach and stop. And all I could say is, okay, God, what is this? And he said, restore Minnesota. I said, great. What does that mean? I said, Lord, it's 2013. America's in a mess. Why don't we restore America? He said, I've got America, you've got Minnesota, and then poof, like Genie in Aladdin gone. I hate it when he does that. So I did the next best thing. I went and interrupted my wife praying. That took me a minute or two. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind, which I probably felt like I had. And I told her what I just shared with you. And then she looked at me in the eyes as only a wife can look at her husband. Okay? You know what I'm talking about? And she said, so, why garlic? I said, I don't know. Do you have any idea what just happened to me? It was a long, quiet ride home. We spent some time the next couple days trying to figure out what this was all about. There's a lot of things that garlic does, and two of them got some pretty significant spiritual application we discovered. One is garlic purifies the heart. Now, it went into my heart, so apparently some work needs to be done in me. It's constant. But more than that, I want you to think about what the Bible has to say about the heart. I want you to think about what the promises of the Lord giving us a new heart. Yeah. Okay. Also, we discovered garlic kills viruses. You ever thought of sin as a spiritual virus? My wife is much more pragmatic than that. My wife had, at that time, a wart on one of her fingers that she tried for a long time that she could not get rid of. Anything at the store, over the counter, didn't work. Save your money, folks. Do this. I'm not prescribing, I get a disclaimer here. This guy tell you what worked for my wife, because here's what she did. She said, wow, warts are caused by a virus. Garlic kills viruses. I wonder. So she went down into our kitchen, where she pulled out a bulb of garlic, took out a little piece. I told you, I'm half Greek, half Jewish. We've got garlic in our house. She made a little paste. She put it on the wart, put a Band-Aid on it, went to bed, got up the next morning, took the Band-Aid off, and the wart came out root and all, and has not been back since May of 2013. Yeah, I thought, glory, hallelujah, you're great. And I said, Lord, that's wonderful. What does that have to do with restoring Minnesota? Taking the wart off my wife's hand is doing what to restore Minnesota? So after he slapped me around for a few minutes, here's what he said. Restore Minnesota means I want you to restore righteousness in Minnesota. I said, okay. And how do you propose we do that? Because there's lots of churches that are preaching the gospel that should be doing that. So I want you to put, at that time the word was chapters. I want you to put a chapter. We now call them a community action team. I want you to put a community action team, at least one, in every county in the state. Now folks, at that time, Restore Minnesota was 2 people, Dale and Sue. There's 87 counties in this state. And we're supposed to put a community action team in all 87 counties. I said, okay. So here's what I did. I went back to my friends at Minnesota Family Council, and I told them the garlic story like I just told you. I told the CEO and the head of the church ministries. We sat across the table at, probably it was Chick-fil-A. Yeah, it was a Chick-fil-A because the ministry guy really likes chicken sandwiches at Chick-fil-A. I told them the story. They looked at me, they looked at each other, and they just broke out, they burst out laughing. And then they looked at me and said, we're not laughing at you. So we've been praying for this for the last 2 years. We need somebody who can travel the outstate of Minnesota and start taking the message of biblical citizenship to the people of Minnesota. And then out of that, let's see what God does when it comes to creating these chapters, if you will. So I spent 4 years as an independent contractor taking the message of Restore Minnesota, the message of Family Council, the message of biblical citizenship. And we would speak in churches, we'd speak in civic groups, you know, I'd speak at birthday parties for 7-year-olds. It doesn't matter. Anywhere we had the opportunity, we were taking the message so we could get Christians educated to know what can we do. We did that for 4 years. And then we had one community action team really take root in central Minnesota. And in long story short there, because I do want to pay attention to the clock. Okay. I've got an alarm that's going to go off like in a minute and a half, even though the pastor said he'd done in noon. I got it set for 11:50. I want to give you a chance to ask maybe a couple questions. So let me try to do this piece quickly. That one group was 35 people. My wife and I went up and spent every Monday night, a couple hours doing it for a year with those 35 people, until we started really figuring out what a community action team could do and what it would look like. Now you first need to understand our mission, and the mission is simply this: Restore Minnesota exists to restore righteousness in Minnesota by promoting biblical citizenship, by educating, equipping, empowering, and encouraging Holy Spirit-led engagement, county by county, community by community, family by family, resulting in spiritual and civic transformation based on the gospel of Jesus Christ. In other words, restoring righteousness meant the gospel had to be at the heart of it. It couldn't be a bunch of Christians doing political stuff where just to throw the gospel on the side to make it look good. We're ministry, we're not politicians. And we impact every part of our culture because that's what Christians are called to be salt and light too. There's no part of the culture we're supposed to miss. I've had pastors tell me, Dale, you can't legislate morality. I've had pastors tell me, I'm so sick and tired of politics, all I'm going to do is preach the gospel. Let me save you some time in case you're there or you know people who say the same thing. Here's the answer. Number one, every bit of legislation represents somebody's morality. You better hope it's biblical. Number two, to the guy who says, I'm so tired of politics that all I'm going to do is preach the gospel, my answer to that person is, you can't preach the whole gospel if you don't include government and politics. Because in your mind, what you're telling me is government is the one area of our culture that we're not supposed to take the gospel into. And in my opinion, that might be the area that needs it most, because they're the ones who create the legislation that impacts everything else in our society. If they're not doing it biblically, how's it going to affect you and me? So that community action team developed until we could hand it over because we wanted it to be local. We used the book of Nehemiah as a model to build your wall in your community. And so we had people who got involved in working with, first of all, serving. How can we help? I want you to get mindset here. In serving the school board. And it wasn't too long after that the domestic terrorist thing on school boards came out. How many of you remember that one? Yeah. Department of Justice talking with President Biden. Said these parents working with school boards with domestic terrorists. For 3 weeks, I had to introduce myself as, hi, my name is Dale Witherington, I'm a domestic terrorist. Because we were teaching people how to properly and respectfully work with school boards and school board members. And also, to pay attention to those school board members that we wanted to vote out of office, as well as those we wanted to support, because we had one up in central Minnesota who said, I don't believe any child 8 years old or under should be taught the Pledge of Allegiance because we should not indoctrinate our kids. But that same person is in favor of critical race theory and comprehensive sex education. If you know anything about those, you want nothing to do with them for your kids. So we get involved in school boards, we get involved in city councils, we get involved in county commissions, we get involved in different ministries locally, we get involved in a couple of places that are helping women get their lives back after they've been rescued from human trafficking. There's lots of things that we do that are not just in the government realm, because it's a matter of God using the people in that area to identify, here's what our area needs, and here's what we want to do, and then we just have to bring some resources to organization so they can go do it together effectively. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay? So we did that for 1 year with one group, and about April of the following year, a friend of mine said, hey, we'd like to start one in Sherburne County, can we do that? And so they came to us and we talked it through and they started, well, that took off like a banshee. It gave birth to 2 others. And over the course of the second year, we went from 1 community action team to 13. Every one of them, they came to us. That just told me the Lord was really leading this thing. And that's why I don't call myself the CEO. I'm the chief steward. This is God's ministry. Amen. I'm stewarding something God gave to my wife and me, and what we've been looking for are those people in those communities who are saying, we want to take our communities back through the gospel in ways that we can penetrate our communities more effectively, whether it's in the city, maybe it's on our campuses. When I came to Christ as a sophomore in high school, we had 9 kids in our little Baptist youth group. I was with the Greek church in the morning and the Baptist church at night. Did that for a year, and then the Jesus movement happened, and we ended up having, from 9 kids, we went to 100 kids, and 80 of them from our high school, because Jesus just penetrated the campus. Because we took Jesus to the campus. So we are looking at how do we take Jesus into our culture through all of our spheres of influence in an organized manner so we can restore righteousness in Minnesota.